forward. So that's what I mean by dealing with the various aspirations we have across identities. Even the book cover, if you notice, is basically juggling multiple hats. Each hat is an identity, right? I'm a father, I'm a son, I'm a brother, I'm a podcaster, I'm an author, I'm a coach. And I'm sure if each of you reflect, there will be at least 5 to 10 identities that you hold across the various domains of life. Now, each of those is like a subject. Now, if you want to do well in the exam across all the subjects, it's going to look very different from being ambitious about your career. So that's the third part. How do we really think about aspirations and not just ambition? Of course, doing well at work is an important element, but it's not the only element. Then the next piece is really the point around how do we really be of value and seek opportunity, right? As we spoke about how the world of work is changing, so the term I use here is we all need to go on a talent market dating process. You know, when you're early, you get a job saying you're an intern here, you're an accountant, you're an auditor, audit intern, etc., etc. But once you cross a certain stage, each one of us has to figure out what are the unique set of skills and networks and relationships we have, and how do we be of opportunity. And even for homemakers, right, traditionally who we call homemakers, very often I see that the ones that are flourishing are those that have an element of contributing to the world outside, because family often can be a low feedback and a low gratitude environment. Unfortunately, at least that's my empirical observation. So that's what I mean by being of value and seeking opportunity, and each of one of us has to go through the dating process. The next piece is understanding yourself and investing in yourself, physical health, mental health, capabilities. And the last piece is relationships. And relationships is not just friends and so on, but really if we can sort of think wider in terms of the people that we want to connect with, very often I find relationships not only bring us happiness and joy, but they also are a pathway to new opportunities. I think Satya alluded to it. So the word that was emerging for me was flavor: family, love, aspiration, value and opportunity, investing in yourself, and relationships. And think of it like a clock, as a circle, not as a straight line. And in the middle of that is rediscovering our flavor, because life keeps changing. Who I was in my 20s, the family context in my 20s, my health, etc., is very different from who I am in my 40s. So just like in ice cream, we have flavor of the season. We all go through different seasons in life. So I think we need to keep rediscovering our flavor as the context changes, whether it's transitions that we choose to make or transitions that happen to us. So in a way, just coming back to you, Bama, that was a long-winded answer. But Ikigai, the limited point I want to make, is useful, but I find it useful at the 30,000 feet level. But on a daily basis, the real question for me is how flavorful is our lives?
Awesome. I think we have a lot of questions from the audience. So what I'm going to do is pop one, which is related to the flavor framework.
Sure.
To kick this off. So the question is, how do you think the flavor framework can help professionals balance the competing demands of work, family, personal aspirations in today's fast-paced world?
Sure. Quick time check. How much time do we have? Who's helping us with the time here? Okay. We wrap up by around 7:20. Okay. Done. Thank you. So I think the one point I would make is very often people see work life as a seesaw. You know, there's work and there's life and they're pulling in different directions. But I feel metaphorically, I think of it more like a flywheel. In the sense, can we do a set of things which energize us to sort of show up better at work? So again, the answer is very contextual, but I think if we want to play the long game, definitely we need to invest in our health. Very often, I'm sure Satya, I'm preaching to the converted here, but very often I see people playing life as a 20-20 game where, you know, you hit 20 runs in this over, but unfortunately life looks more like a test match, right? If we take the metaphor of a 100-year life. So making, again, I bring it back to flavor, but really saying, given the constraints of where I am and what is expected at work, how can I make space for some of these things? And the last point I would make here is that very often, I mean, this is a term that is used by an investment banker who's a neighbor. He said, very often we stay late at work, not to service the client, but to service our insecurity. And that quote stayed with me, because very often, you know, you can get to a good enough outcome by working, I don't know, 50, 60 or hours, whatever. But a certain group of people that work 90 hours and 100 hours, he who shall not be named, I find that very often it doesn't come from a place of adding value to the client, but because of either the fear factor in the company or the culture or something else. So that's my limited take on it. And I think there is a organization culture piece to this as well, right? While the core audience of the book is individual leaders and how they can change, I think in a way my hope is some of these people will hopefully set a culture which provides the right climate for people to lead a flavorful life. Satya, you want to say something there?
I think the balance that we talk about work-life is fairly elusive, right? And I think to think about the balance not at a point in time but over life is the only way to get through it.
Couldn't agree more. There are a couple of questions for you, Satya, which are around the concept of passion and purpose and balancing that. So I'm going to read them both out. Maybe you can respond to them together. Aishwarya says, Deepak argues that purpose is often discovered along the journey. How do you think individuals can stay open to this discovery while managing their daily responsibilities? And there's a related question from Dinesh who says, passion and purpose are often romanticized in self-help literature. Very true. How can individuals strike a balance between pursuing their passions and ensuring financial, emotional stability in the long run?
I'm going to actually take a leaf out of your book, if I may, Deepak, to answer this. I agree fully that passion, purpose, all of these words are fairly romanticized, right? And I remember being in my 20s, even up to through my 30s, very worried that I hadn't found my passion. And I would be almost petrified that somebody would ask me this question, right? What is your passion? Have you found your purpose? And often I would have to, be honest and say, sorry, not yet. I think in the most recent stint that I had, I would say that I truly found, right, a purpose that came together with work at Apollo Hospitals to be able to lead the preventive health aspect of what we need as a country was truly something that spoke to me, brought the expertise that I had gathered, but also allowed me to truly serve, right, and have impact through my work. I think most of the times you pick up on these things and many other passions along the way, right? Whether it is something that you do with your family, or you go trekking or dancing, or whichever it is. All of these are things that often, if you don't know yourself, it's important to listen to what others have to say about you. So Deepak would never have written this book if he didn't pick up on what everybody else was saying to him. And most often I have found that is actually what really has helped me. I think we all get consumed in our own day-to-day life, just like in our own operating roles, we get consumed in our day-to-day, right? What needs to be done today for meeting the quarter's targets. On the flip side, having somebody or listening to people around you who are able to step back and see you from the different facets and highlight what they think you do well allows you to then truly rise to that. I think of, for example, for the last 15 years, ever since my children didn't need me as much, right? I have been spending some time doing leadership development and work with IIT students and corporates and so forth. I do this on the side. It's not something that I've brought on mainstream, but I've always enjoyed it. And the only reason I continue to do it, even though it feels like it's one more thing that I have to do, is because I've often walked away when people said to me, we really enjoyed it. Will you come back again? Right? And for me, that was something that I heard time and again. And the only reason I continue to do this, even during my break time.
Awesome.
And can I just build on that? I think the other thing I've learned about these kinds of transitions or these kind of pursuits, it comes from a lady called Herminia Ibarra. She says that sometimes you need to act your way into these things rather than think your way. So like what I liked about what you said, Satya, was experientially you enjoy it. And people, of course, see value in it. Sometimes in transitions or even other times, we romanticize the notion of, oh, maybe I should do this because it looks cool. For example, Nandan Nilekani was on the podcast. And he spoke about, he moved from Infosys to Aadhaar. He spoke about that transition. Then he said, Aadhaar, I drove through the Rajya Sabha. I wanted to move to Lok Sabha so that I felt I had a standing. Rajya Sabha felt like somebody was doing me a favor. I wanted to win a seat and have a seat on the table on my terms. And he lost that Lok Sabha election. And he said, when I contested that election, I realized that politics is a B2C business. I'm a B2B leader. Right? He said, I didn't have B2C skills in terms of public speech and, rallying the troops and Kannada and so on. And the point I'm making is only when he went through that journey did he realize that that did not make sense, and he came back to being a tech-driven evangelist and so on. So to your point, Satya, I think sometimes we overestimate the head and underestimate the heart as we go through a journey. So one of the things I discuss in the book is how do we really cultivate the heart muscle and start tuning into how we feel as we do a bunch of things.
You spoke a little bit about your teaching. Tell us more. And tell us more about how you created that sense of family, community around yourself to, I think, Deepak's flavor framework. Tell us about that a little bit.
Okay, so the teaching aspect has just sort of evolved, something that I acted more rather than thought about. A lot of my early career days were shaped by the training that I received at McKinsey, and I took it a little bit seriously because it was a big transition for me, and I truly valued the training that they provided. And as I started to incorporate some of those things into my own life, I felt like there was value that I was able to share at home with my husband and my family, as well as with others, right? So for example, when I was pregnant with my first child, and trust me, I've had transitions beyond the professional as well, right? As a daughter-in-law, as a mother of one, mother of two, children that don't need you, right? And so forth. But when I was pregnant with my first, I didn't want to travel as much. And so I actually, for a couple of months, McKinsey said, why don't you help us with recruiting? And I was like, recruiting, really? Okay, fine, I will do this. And then I said, all right, let's make this fun. Let's actually do something that people have never done before. So I took some of the leadership development work that was done on me by McKinsey, took a module or two that was relevant for MBA students, and I had to go to campus and recruit, and did the module and delivered it, right, for a bunch of students, MBA students. And the way they interacted with me and amongst themselves allowed me to then identify students that we would then recruit at McKinsey, right? And so this was the genesis of essentially how I got into it. And I realized, listening to both the students and then also how I felt that day, I can still remember the day I stood in front of that crowd. I truly enjoyed myself. And so over time, I have pretty much pro bono done this with friends who want favors, give me a call and say, hey, I'm struggling with this. Will you come and do a workshop on feedback? Would you come and do a workshop on how women should lead, right? Because it's Women's Day month. Or over time, in the last 8 years now, I've been teaching formally at IIT Madras for a course for the students there called Habits, Happiness, and Success. And I think it came from the fact that these enormously high potential students who are at IIT Madras doing their BTechs suddenly find themselves not at the top of the class like they were for the last 5, 8, 10 years. And a switch goes off. And think about it, right? I mean, these are the students, these are the people that have probably one of the highest potential. And so my course is a 10-week course that essentially reminds them of who they are, digs deep into their self-awareness, reorients them, and then goes through a little bit of a journey of self-transformation, right? Giving them the tools and tactics that they can start applying to truly rise up to that potential as they graduate through IIT Madras. And then 4 years ago, I started a second course around women leadership. I only offer that once a year because there aren't that many women on campus at IIT Madras. But again, it's about finding and nurturing women leadership potential.
Just absolutely awesome. There's one question which I think you've sort of answered. It says, The book emphasizes navigating life's transitions thoughtfully. Could you share a key transition in your life or career and how you navigated it? I think you've spoken at length about it. If there's anything you want to double click.
Yeah, maybe the only one I would talk about a little bit is the transition that we made moving from the US to India, right? It was another transition that we made in our lives. 15 years living in the US, very comfortable, and then I had a child. And so at that point, we suddenly realized the value of family. At least until that point, it was pretty much very high self-orientation. But when this child came into our lives, completely changed who we were and what we valued. And so Sriram, my husband, and I had a chat, and thankfully he was also aligned, and we decided after we met a certain financial goal that we were ready to move back. And we moved back to Madras. It was going to be Madras or Bangalore because that's where family was. We were very clear that it had to be here. Delhi, Bombay did not count, even though they were in the same country, because we might as well be in New York. And so it was Chennai or Bangalore, and he's a Madras boy, so there could not be any other place. But thankfully now we have been in Madras 15 years. Our children have grown up amongst a village of grandparents, extended grandparents, and it's been true joy. So I think that was almost like a little bit of a rubber band we had to, Band-Aid that we had to, rip off.
Two questions for you, Deepak, and I think they relate to each other, so I'm going to club them. The first one says, in many cultures, family plays a significant role in personal growth. And how can individuals better integrate family dynamics into their journey towards realizing their potential? And the other one says, the book focuses on the midlife phase. I think you spoke about it earlier as well. There's a page reference as well here. How can individuals reframe this stage, often seen as stressful or overwhelming, into a period of growth and self-discovery? I just absolutely love this question.
I think, let me try and answer to the two in no particular order. The one piece of wisdom I find useful comes from a gentleman called Stuart Friedman. He's a professor in Wharton, and he talks about 4 domains of life: self, work, home, and community. And he says that all of us, to lead a healthy life, should have a certain allocation of time, attention, and effort in each of these 4 domains. But to me, the more interesting thing he says is, don't see these as 4 different watertight compartments. He says, see if you can do what he calls a 4-way win. And I'll illustrate that with a simple personal example, right? A few years back, when I was trying to become fitter, I decided to sign up for the Mumbai Half Marathon. For that, I had to raise funds for a not-for-profit. I decided to raise funds for an organization called Salam Bombay Foundation, which works with children that have tobacco addiction. So I happened to raise a reasonable chunk of funds for them, and I ended up being one of the highest fundraisers for them. And in the process, since I was training for a marathon, I said a lot of people around me at my workplace were also not so fit. I said, why don't we make this fun and gamify it and make it as a team activity and sort of do something. And there's another company called Stepathlon, which does these steps counting, etc. So we had a set of games where we would count the number of steps people are walking, and some more people signed up for the marathon. Because I was one of the highest fundraisers for this not-for-profit, their brand ambassador is a Bollywood singer, a gentleman called Shan. Some of you might have heard Shan. So they said, since you are one of the top fundraisers, why don't you are eligible, the top 2 fundraisers are eligible to come and record a few songs in his studio in Bandra in Bombay. So I decided to take my 2-year-old daughter, my wife, my sister, and we went and recorded. There's a Bollywood song called It's the Time to Disco, which Shan has sung. And my daughter sang the song Edelweiss from the movie Sound of Music, and I strummed the guitar. The reason I mention it is when I look back, through this process, I got fitter and I invested in myself. I was able to involve colleagues at work, and I think it improved the culture at work. I felt I was able to do something with my family, home, and I felt I was able to do something for the community, which is raise funds for Salam Bombay Foundation. So I think if we look around in our journeys, I think we can find pursuits through which we can address multiple things with one go rather than doing 4 different things. Finally, time is finite. I realize that there are constraints on time, but I feel that there are these, to use the words of Stuart Friedman, if we can find 4-way wins, 3-way wins, I think we can get much more done with the limited time we have. That's sort of one thought that comes to mind. What was the other question? Sorry, I'm not sure if I've answered both the questions. Midlife. Reframe the stage, right? I think you're right. Again, midlife crisis, very often when we say midlife and dash and ask people to finish that phrase, crisis is the word that comes to mind, right? And I think it is messy. But I think, Satya, you alluded to it as well. I think a key part is bringing your family in. Very often I find that we try to fight it alone. For example, when I was trying to move from my previous job, Egon Zehnder, to what I do now, there was a real question about whether what I do now would be commercially sustainable. And it was a real question. I was in a reasonably well-paying job. So the question everybody around me, which was a fair question, was asking was, are you sure you want to leave because you're not enjoying it and you're not giving balance? Because you're leaving a reasonably lucrative career pathway. And I think I would have to give credit to my wife, Kamini, who said, okay, let's do this for a period of time, 12 months, 18 months. In case this doesn't get commercial traction, you have enough goodwill to go back to a different career and get onto a different treadmill. So I think the limited point I would make here, Bama, is I think we try and fight these things alone. But I think if we can carry people along and maybe get the support of the family, I think it becomes a little more solvable.
I also think, so personally, I've found some resources quite helpful. I think you do need to start thinking about yourself a little differently as well. So if you expect to succeed at 40, as you did at maybe 25, maybe that isn't the right thing, right? And I think that is something which is quite important. More recently, I also had the opportunity to read this book, From Strength to Strength, by Arthur Brooks, which I think is a fantastic read for anybody who wants to start thinking about the big transitions that happen potentially after 40, maybe, closer to 50 for some. But I think he lays out so beautifully the whole framework of, how do you start thinking about yourself differently and what, to use a cliched phrase, what is the value that you bring to the table, or how to think about how do you define success for yourself. And I think a lot of navigating this phase is also about making peace with that.
True.
Right? If you want to feel more fulfilled for an extended period of time. There's one question for me, which I'm going to read out and try to answer, which says, the concept of life unfolding in seasons is intriguing. How do you think this perspective applies to building a career in a high-stakes, data-driven field like finance? I think my simple answer is, honestly, it's not very different, I think, from other fields. But building on what I just said, I think possibly the roles that you think about for yourself are different. And if I draw from my own experience, I think for me, the decade before my daughter was born was about, chasing probably a high-paced sort of corporate investment banking career where I didn't worry about the hours that I worked or the travel that I did and so on. And after she came along, I started figuring out what I could do, which would sort of work better, both personally and professionally. And it so happened at that point that I was also looking for opportunities to work and impact. And I found a wonderful opportunity in Chennai. To Satya's point, it brought us back closer to family. That gave us the extended family and a small village to raise my daughter. At the same time, I got to do what I love and so on, and that was great. So that was one, I think, inflection point that I went to. But I had to adapt to the fact that I was working in a smaller organization with more ambiguity, perhaps, with the rush of building something new. And at the next point, when I was looking at an inflection, I had to again choose what kind of paced job I'm looking at and what exactly would inspire me at that stage. And I realized possibly working in a larger organization that believes in playing the long game, has values that are multi-decades old and a lot where I can learn and grow, something that resonated for me, right? So you probably have to tune in, to what both, I think Deepak and Satya have said. You have to tune in better to possibly your own thoughts and talk to a lot of people. I think in each of these transitions, to underscore what Satya said, speaking to people, getting their perspectives was immensely valuable for me. But if anyone wants to speak specifically about the career choices in finance, I'm happy to speak offline. But I think we have another 10, 15 minutes. Deepak, if you want to, I know there's one concept we've spoken about a lot, which is a little counterintuitive, but the role of regret and how that provides an input into making choices during transitions, how that helps you define things better.
I'm lucky to have spoken to a gentleman called Dan Pink, who's written a lovely book. He's written many books, but one of the books he's written is The Power of Regret. And the crux of what he says is very often, when you ask somebody, do you have any regrets? The default answer is no regrets. And we often think that no regrets is a good way to live life, because in a way, you're putting your past behind you and you're moving forward. So even I, for a long time, believed that no regrets was a good way to live life, because in a way it means that you've got closure with the past and you're sort of looking forward. Dan Pink uses a very nice phrase. He says regret is often the photographic negative of the life you could have led. I'll pause there for a second, right? He says it's a negative which never got developed into a positive. And I'm assuming, looking at the crowd here, everyone gets that metaphor. Everybody understands the world of negatives and converting into a positive. There are some cases where, when the audience is very young, they often don't quite get the depth of the metaphor. But I think the reason he says it is that very often the reason you carry a regret is because you value something. But the point he says is regret sometimes tell you a little bit about what you value. Let me give you my personal example. After IMA and working in KPMG for 5 years, I wanted to do higher studies. And initially I wanted to do a PhD. And I applied, I spoke to a bunch of people, and very quickly the feedback I got was, if you want to come back to a corporate career, a PhD is the wrong pathway. At least your starting point when you pursue a PhD should be that you want to become a professor somewhere. So, okay, I then applied to masters and got to London Business School, etc. But a part of me was always saying, I wish I'd done a PhD. Cut to today, literally 3-4 months back, somebody sent me a message on LinkedIn saying, I've been following your Play to Potential podcast. I said, thank you, blah, blah, blah. And generally one of the things when somebody sends a thank you note is I say, why do you like it? There are hundreds of other podcasts around. What do you like about this? And he says, I like the fact that you bring a researcher's mindset to the way you structure the podcast. So when I look back, I think, of course, we can all say hindsight is 20/20. But very often I find that, what we carry in our head sometimes manifests in a different way in something else we do. So I find, back to Dan Pink, I think there is merit in having closure with the past and moving forward. But I think regret sometimes also carries a signal. So just sort of reflecting on it lightly without turning it into sleepless nights, I think often can tell us a little bit about what we value. And sometimes it can give us a sense of the direction we need to take.
Awesome. Any questions from the room? I'm sorry, I didn't check because we have chits with questions, but I don't know.
Maybe 1 or 2 questions from the audience and then we can close. Wow. I wish I had a deep point of view, but I think the limited point of view from my vantage point, I would say is, I had an opportunity to talk to Vishwanathan Anand, the chess legend, on my podcast. And I asked him the same question. In a world where machines are getting smarter, man versus machine, who do you think will win? And to me, he said, I don't think that's the right question to ask, man versus machine. The right question to ask is man plus machine on one side and man plus machine on the other side, who will win? Right? Because all of us have access to AI. So it's not as if AI is competing with us. So making it a little more practical, one of the inputs I got from my brother-in-law, who till recently was a leader at Xiaomi, the Chinese mobile company. He's clearly a lot more tech savvy. He said, you've done these 100 podcasts. What stops you from creating a bot which mines the wisdom from these 100 conversations? Let's say the play to potential bot, that somebody could just log in and say, I'm in this transition. How should I think about it? And that mines the wisdom of those conversations and then gives a point of view. I think it is a possibility. I haven't acted on it. But the limited point I'm making is whichever field we are in, whether we are a radiologist looking at scans or a coach or somebody else or a finance professional, I think there is an adjacency, or I think there is a co-pilot role it can play, which sort of makes that man plus machine or a woman plus machine that much smarter. So I'm sure AI is a deeper question about jobs, employability, etc. But the top of mind answer that emerges is that's like, to me, feels like the low-hanging fruit that all of us can look at. But welcome any other inputs. Yes, sir.
So very quick question. So thanks Deepak, thanks Bama, and thank you Satya, very insightful conversation. I just wanted to ask you, as a young professional who's navigating my career, like what has been the role of coaches and mentors, and how have you actively sought out mentors? Until I was in college, we have the supervisor, we have a college supervisor who's always guiding you step by step. But then when you're in your professional world, what efforts did you make to reach out to mentors who would be with you over a longer period of time?
All right, so I think this falls into the R part, if you will, of flavor framework that Deepak writes, and I'm just going to share a little bit of a tactical thing that might help you. So I am generally a very introverted person. I don't network very easily, but very early on in one of these panels, someone at least what I took away was that networks and connections are fairly important. And so I decided I would gamify it for myself so that I would find a way to stick to it. I actually have on my phone now, over the years, a rolling list of people by city, right? And I keep adding to it as I meet new people that I love to stay in touch with and develop a deeper relationship. When I land in that city, I find a way to connect with at least two of them every time I go. I also, if something happens, a book I read or a memory is triggered or I see an ad based on a brand that, for a company they're working for, anything that reminds me of them, I quickly message them. I think if we use social media and tools that are at our fingertips today to be able to deepen some of these connections and rather than be addicted to them, it's helpful. So a quick no agenda, hi, hello, how are you, just checking in, seeing what you're up to, goes a very long way because most people are actually surprised, don't expect it, and then will remember you for it, right? And I think sometimes these no agenda conversations, and I think the last thing I'd like to leave you with is, I do have many mentor sponsors over, right, the years, but I don't think I've ever told them to their face, you are my mentor, right? And I think that's a relationship that evolves, that is reciprocal and mutual, and is simply a label we're giving for a very deep relationship.
Mr. Deepak, I would just like you to redefine potential for us in some and substance. I haven't read the book yet, I have it with me, but I would request you to just redefine so that we go back with the idea of what you think ultimately what potential is.
Sure. Again, for the benefit of the rest, I don't want to repeat the whole thing, but I think if I had to distill it, it's like doing the best given what we have. And what I mean by that is we are blessed with a certain set of skills, certain set of relationships, certain set of aptitudes, a certain set of things that energize us, and a certain network that we have access to. So given all this and given the world of opportunity, how can we do the best we can across the various facets of our life and lead a play to our potential across the dimensions of life. That would be sort of the Twitter-sized or the X-sized definition of potential, but happy to speak more. Thank you.